This is Functionally Literate. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Zach.
This is going to one day be a podcast about books. I am reading Indian Mythology, Tales, Symbols, and Rituals from the Heart of the Subcontinent by Devdutt Pattanik.
And I read Myths of the Hindus and Buddhists by Ananda K. Kumaraswamy and Sister Nivedita.
So yeah, we are covering Hindu mythology today. Do you think they were advanced enough to know in vitro fertilization? Because I got another story here that suggests that possibly.
In vitro fertilization. I mean, I'm not familiar enough with in vitro fertilization to know the specifics of exactly how it works. So maybe there was a primitive form of it?
Gandhari's children from the Mahabharata.
Mm-hmm.
The sage Vyasa had blessed Gandhari that she would bear 100 sons. Unfortunately, Gandhari gave birth to a ball of flesh as hard and cold as metal after 2 years of pregnancy. Distraught, she approached Vyasa, who asked Gandhari to cut the ball of flesh into 100 pieces and place each piece in a jar of clarified butter. Vyasa then chanted hymns and blessed the pots. 9 months later, the pots were broken. In each pot, there was a male child. Thus, the 100 sons of Gandhari, the Kauravas, were born.
Yeah, I don't think that's what that is. I don't know. I mean, I don't, and maybe this is a bias on my part, but I tend to read these stories more as psychologically symbolic, not scientifically symbolic. You know, like when I read that, I don't think, oh, she literally gave birth to a thing and that thing had to be cut up. You know, like she literally expelled an egg and then they took that egg and they multiplied it. And these jars were like petri dishes, or they were, you know, some sort of container in which to fertilize and to grow a fetus. And then eventually they were born. That's, you know, that's just not how I read it. It's more like she gave birth to some immaterial concept that for the sake of her own continuance had to be split up outside of her, you know, and I'd have to think harder on what that might be. I don't know enough familiarity with like those characters to really know what they might represent. So as far as coming up with what that actually means, I don't have the information in front of me to do that. But to read that and think, oh, this is an ancient person's metaphorical scientific explanation, like that just seems silly to me.
Right. Yeah, no,
especially
this
since
final chapter gets really weird.
Especially since like how would you do that in clarified butter?
I don't know.
You know, like
I really don't know. I thought it was interesting that it was clarified butter because I know that that's unique to India. Like it originated there or around there.
Yeah, but like I just don't see how that's a metaphor for something like. And here's the other thing: as long as science has been practiced as what we recognize as science, it's been very anti-metaphor. You write exactly what you did, not a metaphor of what you did. You know, when you start doing that, you get more into like alchemy, which was very specifically
at one point viewed as a form of science.
Yeah, but was very specifically not a material science. It was a philosophical science. The material was the metaphor.
Okay.
And sometimes you would carry out the literal experiments as a sort of philosophical experiment. But I don't think that's what the Indians were doing.
I've got a few stories here that might seem a little less outlandish to you.
Okay.
So this one was suggested to mean that probably human sacrifice was probably not unknown in the Vedic culture at one point.
Oh, that seems pretty obvious.
The sacrifice of Sunashepas from the Mahabharata. King Harishchandra wanted a son so desperately that he promised Varuna, the sea god, that if he could only become a father, he would sacrifice his son in the 16th year of his life. The son was born, and 16 years passed, but Harishchandra could not bring himself to sacrifice the boy. Infuriated, Varuna struck Harishchandra with dropsy, which I didn't know what that was. I looked it up. It's edema. So the king begged for mercy, and a compromise was reached. Varuna agreed to the sacrifice of any 16-year-old Brahmani boy. Only one Brahmana agreed to part with his son, Sunashepas, but only in exchange for 100 cows. The lad was brought to the sacrificial altar. When Vishwamitra, the presiding priest, realized that the sacrificial beast was a human, he was horrified. He taught the boy a hymn to appease Varuna and escape this fate. At the appointed hour, no priest was willing to tie the boy to the sacrificial post. Again, the boy's father agreed to do the needful for a price. Then it was time to behead the boy. Again, the boy's father agreed to do so for a price. Sunashepas wept, but no one heard his cry, so he began chanting the hymn to Varuna. So melodious was his voice that the Devas descended from the celestial regions and stopped the sacrifice. Vishwamitra was made the foster father of the boy, who was blessed by Indra. The gods declared they would never again accept human sacrifice, suggesting that they did before this happened.
So, historically speaking, human sacrifice was performed in India as late as 1812,
well,
I want to say. When the British were occupying, they actually had to forcefully stop a specific village from sacrificing people.
Oof.
Because they kept doing it, and the British were like, no, we don't do that. And the Indians are like, you don't do that.
We do that.
We do that.
Okay.
But they were like kidnapping people from other villages to do it. They weren't sacrificing their own people because you'd run out pretty fast.
Yeah.
No, they were taking other people. And those villages complained to the occupying British, hey, all our people keep going missing. Do something about it. If you want to be in charge, fucking be in charge. Work, you know? And then British were like, all right, we'll look into it. And they found this village was just sacrificing a bunch of people.
Jesus. Okay. I've got another story that talks about a once common practice called Literate. You know what that is?
It does not sound familiar, but...
So this story is called The Children of Vichitravirya from the Mahabharata. Vichitravirya died, leaving behind two childless widows, Ambika and Ambalika. So Vichitravirya's mother, Satyavati, called the sage Vyasa to do the needful. He went to Ambika, who shut her eyes while they made love. As a result, she bore a blind son called Dhritarashtra. Vyasa then went to Ambalika, who turned pale when she saw his austere visage. Pandu, the child she bore, was pale and sickly. Satyavati asked Vyasa to stay and father a healthier child. This time the two widows did not oblige, instead sending their maid, who made love without any fear or disgust. She bore a perfect son called Vidura. When Satyavati learned that the widows had sent a maid in their place, she was angry. She tried to force the widows, but Vyasa told her to stop. Such things are not to be done by force, he said.
Mm-hmm.
So, levirate is the practice of the wife of a man who is either dead or impotent to have sex with another man to bear children.
Yes. Well, and Vyasa is the grandfather of the Pandaras, the winning side of that war.
Mm.
And that's how they came into existence.
Okay.
I can't pronounce it. The D one you just said.
Dhritarashtra.
Dhritarashtra, yeah. He was the main...
the blind son.
Yeah, antagonist in that war because his son was considered unfit to be king because he becomes king, but he's blind.
Uh-huh.
His son's considered unfit. So the people, including his court officials, suggest passing the throne instead of his son to his nephew, who is the child of the other kid born from the pale. I can't remember his name either.
The other one was called Pandu.
Pandu. So giving it to Pandu's son. And
he was the pale, sickly one.
Yeah, his kids are the four Arjuna and his three brothers. And that's sort of the root of the conflict, is that as a king, he's very emotional. So, I mean, he's blind, but like his real fault, I guess the blindness is sort of the physical manifestation of the internal fault, which is that he really just kind of takes the advice of whoever gives him any.
Oh no.
And so
That's
like
terrible.
Yeah, he's literally blind.
Yeah.
Because he's also emotionally blind. Like he can't tell when someone is giving him bad advice. And he loves his son.
Yeah.
Too much. Like he would do anything for his son. But he's this sort of weak-willed guy, and so his son's like, "Hey Dad, we should do this." And so he does it, and then he feels really bad about doing it.
But his son was like, "We should do this."
Yeah. And so like in one of the things, the leader of the Pandavas is a known gambling addict and is really bad at it. And so one of the ways that they're like, oh, we can con them like out of their part of the inheritance is we'll challenge him to a gambling match, and he'll have to accept because of his honor. Like that's part of one of the knightly rules is you can't deny a challenge to a fight, and you can't deny a challenge to a gambling game, which is a weird rule to me. But
you can't do what?
If someone challenges you to a game of dice, you can't say no. It is.
What, like in Pokemon?
Sort of. It's
like,
dishonorable to say no.
I saw you. We have to battle.
Right. Well, if someone says, "Hey, play me in a game of dice," I'm challenging you. You can't go,
okay.
"Nah, I don't have time." Like you have to be like, "Yep,
okay.
Name the time and place. We'll do it." And so they're going to take advantage of this guy that they know to be this horrible gambler, and they build this gambling hall. They find the best gambler that they know, and they're like, "You're going to challenge him." And so that he just keeps getting higher and higher stakes. Eventually, like he bets him and his brothers into slavery, loses. Then he bets his wife, loses.
My God.
Like, and there comes this funny scene where they take his wife, and she's like, "By what right are you taking me?" And they're like, "Your husband lost you in a gambling match." And she's like, "Explain to me exactly what happened." And what happened was first, he had bet his brothers and himself, which, in light of the fact that this guy's a gambling addict, it is better to bet yourself than your wife. You know, because at least you're gambling with your own bullshit and not hers.
Not your wife, yeah.
But she gets out of it by saying, how does he have any claim to me as a wife if he himself is already a slave? He can't then gamble me. That doesn't work. And then everyone there is like, yeah, that checks out. Okay, you're good. You're good to go.
You're good. You're right.
So basically, after he bet himself into slavery, everything he said after that was bullshit because he didn't own anything anymore because he was a fucking slave.
Fantastic.
But that's the part where Dhritarashtra, whatever his name was, Dhritarashtra, that's where he gets weak and is like, oh my God, like one of the four brothers, Arjuna, is like the greatest warrior ever. Mm-hmm. His charioteer is Krishna, who is the embodiment of Vishnu. You know, it's like, you can't fight that guy. He'll win.
Yeah.
And he just gets terrified all of a sudden. He's like, oh my God, they're going to come back and take revenge. They're going to slaughter everybody. Like, we really fucked up. And so he just like begs forgiveness, forgives all the debts. Like, please just pretend like this didn't happen, and sends them away. So they don't have to pay any of the debts that they incurred in this gambling, including being slaves now. And then the son finds out and is like, Dad, you fucking idiot. Like, we wasted all that time. Now they think we're these deceitful assholes, which they were.
Yeah.
But like, they still have all their stuff, and now we look stupid. And the dad's just like, I'm sorry. Like, I think that was a bad idea. We shouldn't have done it. And then his son just keeps talking him into these horrible ideas, really personifying, why that guy shouldn't be king now, because he's really just taking bad advice from everybody that's giving him bad advice.
Yeah.
And then backing out of it when he realizes it's bad, which is not what you want a king to do. And why his son shouldn't be king, because he's a backstabbing piece of shit.
Who's giving bad advice.
Right. And if he's giving bad advice, he's not going to take good advice. And so that's kind of where the whole war comes from, is that everyone who knows anything is like, you really ought to be handing this off to your nephew.
The war that the Anti-Deverans alleged was an Atlantean alien war, that one?
Yes. Yeah. And Arjuna was somehow like the chief engineer of that nuclear missile. Yeah.
I've got another story here.
Oh boy.
That suggests that sex hospitality was not unknown in ancient India.
Mm-hmm.
This is called Ogavati's obedience from the Mahabharata. Sudarshana had asked his wife, Ogavati, to please his guests in every way. While he was away, a mendicant, which is a beggar, arrived at their doorstep. Instead of alms, which means food or money, instead of asking for food or money, he asked for sex. He was like, "Hey, Ogavati, I want some sexual favors," and she was like, "Okay."
I was told to do that, so.
So while the two were having intercourse, Sudarshana returned, and he called out to his wife. He was like, "Honey, I'm home," and she said, "I'm busy satisfying the desire of our guest." And he was like, "Okay, carry on. I'll wait till you're done." And the beggar turned out to be Dharma Manifest, and he was pleased with the couple and blessed them for upholding the social law.
Yeah. So there's a ritual in India. Now, I can't specifically claim that this is Hindu because I don't actually know, and I don't know the name of it. But the process is basically everyone shows up, male and female, shows up with a vest, and they put their vest in a basket. There's a basket for the men, there's a basket for the women. And then they all draw vests, and you just have sex with the person whose vest you draw. Now, where it gets a little weird for me, looking outside of that culture.
You are a Catholic.
I mean, just even as like an American,
Sure.
A member of Western civilization.
Sure.
There are family members in this ritual together. You could draw your mother's vest.
And have incestuous relations.
And you were not only permitted, but encouraged to still participate. And that's why it's not just a Catholic thing where I'm like, I'm not just some Catholic prude that's like, ooh, weird. You know, like, there are plenty of cultures that have orgiastic rituals, including some Christian ones.
Sure.
Sorry. But it's the idea that this erotic ritual transcends even familial relationships.
Yeah.
So that story seems tame.
Yeah.
By comparison, because she's not related to that person. But if she were, she would still be expected to do that. If her brother had come and said that, the rule would still be, yeah, do it.
Do it.
Because your brother told you to. He's your guest. And it's like, well, that's weird. Now, I don't know how that would work. In that I don't know if homosexuality ever happened. I don't know. I mean, ritually, I'm sure it happened.
I don't know. But that does explain a little bit, because there was a lot of incest stories here, or specifically stories to avoid incest, right? Like, so, for instance, we've got a creation myth here, right? In the beginning of this in the beginning, the supreme goddess Adi Shakti laid 3 eggs in a lotus. From these 3 eggs emerged the 3 worlds and the 3 gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Desire awoke in the heart of the goddess, who asked the gods to make love to her. "But you are our mother," said Brahma and Vishnu, and they shied away. And the goddess, she was angry at being rejected, and so she reduced those 2 gods to ashes by casting a glance of her fiery 3rd eye. And then she turned to Shiva, who agreed to make love to her, but only if she gave him the eye. And so she did. And then instead of making love to her, Shiva reduced her to ashes and revived the other 2 gods. And so then Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva decided to populate the world with living beings, but they couldn't do it without, wives. So they gathered the heap of ashes that was once their mother, Adi Shakti, divided it into 3 parts, and then with the power of the 3rd eye, created the 3 goddesses, Saraswati, Lakshmi, and Gauri. And then the 3 goddesses married the 3 gods, and together they populated the cosmos with all manner of plants, animals, and other living things, including gods, demons, and humans. So in the beginning, there was incestuous desire.
Right. And then it's destroyed, but from the remnants of is created the new wives.
Right.
So
it's a thing. And This is incest is in other creation stories as well. So I've got this other one.
Well, we talked about this pretty extensively. Well, maybe it wasn't extensive. I'd have to go back and listen, but at least mentioned it in the Egyptian episode. Almost all of those pairs of gods were brother-sister pairs.
Yeah,
that's very common in deities to be related to your mate.
What we've said in the past is there is no incest among gods.
Right.
But that's not true in Hinduism. There is incest in Hinduism.
Yes.
And oftentimes it's avoided and derided. So I've got another creation story here with Brahma. So in the beginning, a lotus bloomed. Within sat Brahma. He opened his eyes and realized he was all alone. Afraid, he sought the origin of the lotus he sat on. It emerged from the navel of Vishnu, who slept on the coils of the serpent Ananta Sesha on the surface of a boundless ocean of milk. Having been informed by Vishnu, Brahma set about creating living things. So he was alone, and he was longing for company, so he created children. He created 4 men molded out of his thoughts, and he asked his mind-born sons to multiply, but they refused and disappeared. And he was confused about why that was, and he came to the conclusion that it was his sons were boys. So he created 7 more sons, and this time he created men. Mm-hmm. And they were willing to populate the cosmos, but they didn't know how. And so then Brahma, he pondered this question until he saw a vision of Shiva, whose left half was a woman. And so inspired by this, Brahma split himself in 2, and from his left half he created a woman. Such was the woman's beauty that desire rose in the heart of Brahma and his sons. Desire took the form of Kandarpa, the winsome god of lust, who rode a parrot and aroused the 5 senses by shooting his 5 flower-tipped arrows with his sugarcane bow, and then overwhelmed by yearning to embrace this woman, not Kandarpa, to be clear. That was created from their lust. Mm-hmm. And so, overwhelmed by this embrace, they spurted semen and began to multiply. Yeah.
So I think it's pretty obvious that, like, in basically every culture, casual incestuous relationships are, like, not accepted. It just struck me that in this specific ritual practice, it was okay. And that I think is the difference, is they're like, incest in ritual is fine because the ritual is more important than the relationship.
Well, so this is where it's confusing, right? Because it is and isn't fine. So here's the next part. Brahma saw the first woman he had created, his daughter, and was overwhelmed by desire. The daughter circled her creator with reverence. Not wanting to lose sight of her beautiful form, Brahma sprouted 4 heads, each facing a cardinal direction. The daughter, disgusted by her father's display of unbridled lust, rose to the sky. Brahma popped a 5th head atop the other 4 and voiced his carnal intentions. Brahma's mind-born sons howled in horror at the misconduct of their father. From the howl emerged Rudra, who wrenched off Brahma's 5th and most lustful head with his sharp claws. Brahma was thus subdued by violence. And this was used in the book to talk about how over time things become corrupted and then death is required.
Yeah. Well, and so I would say this condemnation of incest here is independent of the ritual, and that's because, one, this isn't a ritual.
Yeah.
It's just lust. So when you participate in this ritual, if you manage to draw your sister's vest, you don't lust after your sister. That's not, you didn't show up going, I hope I get my sister's. Like, if you did, that would be wrong.
Yeah.
And that's the point, is that to want that casually is wrong. Mm-hmm. But that's different from accepting that it happens in a religious ceremony.
There was There's something about that. There's a kernel there that reminds me of another story. Not about incest, for once.
That's good. If we could move on.
If we could move on from that, yeah. So this story is called Krishna's Rasa Leela from the Gita Govinda.
Rasa Leela.
On full moon nights in the meadows on the banks of the river Yamuna, Krishna would play his flute, beckoning the milkmaids of his village.
Mm-hmm.
They would come secretly, risking their reputations, and make her circle around him and dance to his tune, losing themselves completely in the performance. When this happened, it seemed to each milkmaid that Krishna danced with her alone. Sometimes the milkmaids boasted that Krishna belonged to them and only them. When this happened, Krishna would disappear, making the women experience the pain of separation. Krishna would only return when this need to possess him was abandoned. And basically, Krishna's the universe, and every individual person is an individual person. You are a part of the universe. The universe is not a part of you. And so to boast that the universe is yours, it separates you from the universe.
To try to take possession of existence.
Yeah.
You can't.
Yeah.
And when you do, you will find that existence is not what you wanted it to be.
Yeah.
That's Krishna and the Gopis is like a real famous Krishna story. Gopi is the milkmaids.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But yeah, there's a specific story that's like the night this happens, and there's a woman that he takes with him. And all the other gopis are like super upset because he's disappeared, and they see two pairs of footprints. One are his, one are this woman's, and they're like, "Oh my God, this super lucky woman. We're so mad and jealous of her." And then they find her, and as soon as they see her, like, he has now left her because she was like, "You're just mine," and he's like, "Nope," and leaves her in the forest. They find her, and as soon as they see her, then they feel sorry for her. They're like, "Oh no, she's been abandoned by Krishna, just like all of us. We have to find him. We miss him so much." But that's a very famous Krishna story, especially the idea that he sort of multiplies himself so that he's dancing with every single woman, and they all only think it's just them. There's also some versions of the story that this dancing excites them to erotic levels and fulfills them.
Yeah.
Which is to say they all orgasm from dancing with Krishna.
Yeah. I can see that.
Yeah. And then, all these are married women. These are women with families.
Yeah.
But there's no shame in them doing it. There's only shame.
Well, Krishna's the universe.
On their side. That's what I'm saying, is they feel shame, and Krishna's like, don't. Everything's fine.
Yeah.
Everything's okay. Go home to your families and your husbands. Don't be ashamed of what you did. Everything's fine. And that kind of explanation only works when you take it effect. Like, well, Krishna wasn't a literal person that did this to these women. Because if he was, I don't know. I think cheating on your husband, you should be a little shamed. You should feel bad about that. Even if that was with God. I think if Jesus was like, "You had sex with me, that's fine." No, it's not. No, it's not. That's not fine. Not that I don't. Jesus wouldn't ask that, but that's not the point.
Jumping around a bit because none of my stories are really like linked to each other as such.
The thing about the Hinduism is that they are.
Well, sure,
they're all linked.
They're all
in
linked.
So many spider webbing ways.
Sure.
That it's very confusing. There's just so much background to it all. You got the four Vedas. You got to know all those. You've got the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, and others. All the Upanishads. You have
these
to
are
know.
These are all books and stories.
Yeah. This is all the material that contains what we know of the Hindu, and that's not counting like the discussions that have been written about it by yogis and rishis and all of the different explorations of what they mean. I mean, there's just so much there.
So with that in mind, I have a tangentially related story explaining why a specific temple takes donations.
Okay.
So this is donations for Venkateshwara from the Tirumalai Sthala Purana. Lakshmi was so angry with her consort Vishnu that she left his celestial abode, Vaikuntha, and came down to earth. To woo her back, Vishnu came down too. But Lakshmi, who had taken up residence at Karavirapura, was too angry to return. Until she calmed down, Vishnu decided to take up residence at Tirumalai, whose 7 hills reminded him of the 7 hoods of Adisesha, the serpent of time, on whose coils he rested at Vaikuntha. To reside on the hills of Tirumalai, Vishnu had to marry the local princess. To marry her, he had to pay a heavy bridal price. Without Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth, by his side, Vishnu had no money. So he took a loan from Kubera, the treasurer of the gods. Until he repays this loan, Vishnu cannot leave his residence atop Tirumalai. As the lord of the hill, he is revered as Venkateshwara. So as Venkateshwara at Tirumalai, which is where this temple is, this is the explanation for why people make donations there.
We're trying to pay back Vishnu's debt.
Yeah.
So that he can go home.
Yeah.
That's funny. That's good.
That was a good one.
That's a fun little myth.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. I've got a few more that I thought was fun. Let's see. Ooh, this is a good one. It explains the phases of the moon.
Okay.
So this is called Chandra and the Nakshatras from the Samnashthala Purana. The moon god Chandra was married to 27 daughters of the priest king Daksha, but he preferred only one, Rohini. Daksha warned Chandra to treat all his daughters equally, so when Chandra ignored this warning, Daksha cursed him to lose his potency and wither away. Distraught, Chandra invoked Shiva, who restored his potency, but it wasn't perfect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the way it worked is Chandra had to agree to visit each of his wives at least once a month. So his potency waxes every time he approaches Rohini and wanes every time he moves away from her, thus explaining the cycle of the moon and how it waxes and wanes.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was interesting.
That is interesting. Another exception to the general rule where the celestial deity of the moon is a man and not a woman.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Usually the moon is a woman and the sun is a man.
Mm-hmm.
So I did think that was interesting. I've got a few others here that I thought were worth talking about. Let's see. This one is called... oh, yeah, okay. Now I remember why I wanted to talk about these stories. So there was this idea in Hinduism about... So we talked a lot about tantric rituals, right? Like rituals to do with eroticism and sex, but there was also like a polar opposite of that, right? Like the idea of there is power in chastity. There's power in ignoring your physical desires, right? Yep. So this one is called The Seduction of Rishyashringa from the Mahabharata. Rishyashringa's father never allowed him to see a woman. This enforced chastity made Rishyashringa so powerful that one day when a downpour drenched him, he cursed the skies and prevented rain from falling on the ground. The only way to break the curse was to make him lose his chastity and hence his powers. So King Lomaharsha sent his daughter Shanta to seduce the innocent sage. Rishyashringa succumbed in no time. With his power gone, it began to rain once again.
I think there's some pretty compelling symbolism there for reproduction.
Yeah.
Yeah. In that it's raining, which is good. That's how plants will reproduce, right? You need the water to sustain the vigor of life on the planet. And here's this guy who's chaste, but it's not of his own doing. It's been enforced on him. And so he curses this guy, and that dries out the world. Now, people outside that can say, well, that's obviously not good. So they introduce the idea of sex to him, reproduction. And when he immediately succumbs, what happens?
It rains.
Life-renewing force is brought back to the world.
Yeah.
So you can't continue humanity while being chaste.
Yeah. There's another one about this hero Skanda, who is the most hyper-masculine of heroes. He was a Ionija, someone not born of a womb, and who distanced themselves from women.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So this is the story of the birth of Skanda, who is, he was the commander of the celestial armies, god of war, and lord of the planet Mars.
Mm-hmm. That all checks out.
Skanda was born of Shiva's semen, which had remained unshed for eons. As incubation in a womb would have made Skanda mortal, the gods ensured that Shiva shed his seed outside his consort's body. So fiery was the seed that even the fire god could not hold it. Neither Vayu, the wind god, nor Ganga, the river nymph, could cool it. Finally, the seed set a marsh on fire. Within the embers, the seed transformed into a 6-headed child that was nursed by 6 forest nymphs called Kritikas. When he was barely 6 days old, the hypermasculine child was strong and virile enough to kill the demon Taraka.
That's a manly man.
That is a manly man. I find it interesting, this idea that you can be a manly, hyper-masculine guy without sex.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. That I guess it has something to do with the distancing in thought between war and love. Mm-hmm. Because the erotic, whether it's love or ritual or whatever you want to call it, is very opposite war. And so I guess in my mind, they sort of developed this even in more than the Greeks would have with Ares, because even Ares was the romantic partner of Aphrodite.
Yeah.
Aphrodite was married to Hephaestus, but she cheated on him with Ares all the time.
All the time.
And this is sort of a more
about that in our first episode.
A more distilled idea of like, no, the god of war has no interest in reproductive action. That's creation. War is strictly a destructive process. Mm-hmm. And so the deity that would oversee that sort of sphere of influence wouldn't want to have sex.
Yeah. Well, so that's interesting too, because there's this goddess called Chinnamastika. She is the goddess who embodies the rawness of nature, right? And so she's a very violent and sexual being, because she's represented as this headless woman. She has a head, but it's not connected to her body. Mm-hmm. Her head's usually on a platter that she holds, and she consumes the blood from her torso, and she will sit on top of a woman who is having sex on top. And it's to symbolize like the rawness of sex and violence. So I guess Hinduism's confusing is what I'm trying to say. To me.
It's very complicated. One of the things that makes the Hinduism, I think, stand out from a lot of the things that we've talked about previously is that most of what we have talked about previously isn't still practiced today as far as religion. And is not seriously considered as a philosophical treatise on anything, whereas Hinduism is.
Yeah, we said this was going to get tricky because once we get into Eastern cultures, these are still practiced religions. So I'm trying to be respectful. I just don't understand. And
Hinduism is also, at least in its root form, older than most of those, if not all of them. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the one that comes the closest, well, I guess Egyptian would be older, but it also kind of died out sooner. But Hinduism is probably as old, if not older, than any of the Greek thought. Mm-hmm. And so it's had this, 5,000 years of continuous development. There's a lot more nuance to it than in a lot of the things we've talked about so far, just because of that. Just because it's been continuously looked at, studied, rewritten, studied more, further refined, like these ideas further abstracted, more differentiated. So, and that I think really comes to the front when it comes to things like the God of War in Greek culture being a little bit more personable, a little bit more relatable. Whereas in Hinduism, they've really abstracted the idea to such a pure essence that it's like, it is this very exclusively male instinct. It's a male activity. There isn't much essence of femininity in war, but they separate war from violence.
Mm-hmm.
Those are different. War is sort of an organized violence on behalf of a group.
Yeah, they talk about that because dharma is it's a social hierarchy imposed on nature.
Yes.
Yeah. I've got another one here. This one talks about how dharma is really an ideology that's only for men. Women, irrespective of their caste, for them there is only something called Sri Dharma, in other words, obedience to men. Okay, so this story is called Jvetaketu's Law from the Mahabharata. Jvetaketu saw his mother in the arms of another man. When he complained to his father, he was told, "All women are free to do as they wish." Horrified by this statement, Jvetaketu realized that it was thus impossible for any man to know who his biological father was. Jvetaketu was determined to set things right, so he decreed that henceforth a woman could have sexual relations only with her husband or with whomever he selected. Which I think is a load of bullshit, frankly, but, whatever.
Well, I don't know who I would select other than myself for my wife to have sex with. That said, I think I'm on the son's side here. Don't be doing that. I just don't think you should do that. Not good. Not good. That's a very cavalier husband. That's all I'm saying. If that's
fine,
if that's how they're happy,
it's fine.
I guess good for them. I don't think that's good though.
There was also some interesting. There was more on this. There was, because there was this story and a few others was the beginning of like trying to establish that patriarchy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that we've got the Pandava, those were the 5 sons, right?
Yeah.
So they all shared one wife.
Yes.
And that was fine until this started to happen when they were trying to establish this patriarchy. And so then they had to kind of like figure out a way to justify that, like why this was the case. And so this I thought was just a really funny explanation of how that happened. Arjuna, one of the Pandavas, won Draupadi's hand by winning an archery contest.
Mm-hmm.
He returned home and told his mother, "Guess what I won?" And without even turning back, she replied, "Whatever it is, share it with your brothers." And so the obedient Arjuna, therefore, shared his wife with his 4 brothers.
Yes.
Which I just... the idea of that, just like, I don't care. Just share it with your brothers.
Whatever it is, I don't want to hear any fighting about it. I don't want to hear he won't share. Share with your brothers.
Yeah. There was another attempt to explain that marriage. Which was Shiva blesses Draupadi.
Mm-hmm.
So Shiva was pleased with Draupadi's devotion and offered her anything she wanted. And so Draupadi wanted a husband with 5 qualities. She said, "I want a husband who is noble, who is strong, who is a skilled warrior, who is handsome, and who is wise." And Shiva misunderstood her wish and was like, "So be it. You will have 5 such husbands."
Yeah. So each of the brothers embody really one of those qualities. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Rather than one that embodies all 5.
Yeah. I just think the Hindu marital relationship is a lot more complex than the traditional Western one, which is a little bit more clear cut.
It is.
Restrictive, though it may be. Simpler. Easier to understand for sure.
With the rise of patriarchy, women were expected to do what their husbands told them. Those who obeyed were deified, those who did not were demonized. Narratives reflected a carrot and stick approach, such as this one, Vrinda's chastity, from the Shiva Purana. Vrinda's chastity cast a shield of invulnerability around her husband, Jalandhara. This made him invincible in battle. Distressed, the gods sought the help of Vishnu, who seduced Vrinda by taking the form of her husband. That sounds familiar.
Mm-hmm.
By the time Vrinda realized that the man who posed as her husband was an imposter, it was too late. She had lost her chastity, and her husband lost the shield of invulnerability. He was killed by the gods, and she became a widow.
Yeah. These, I don't know. I can't comment too much on these just because my own view of marriage, I'm like, yeah. don't cheat on your husband.
Don't cheat on your husband.
I mean, my wife doesn't cheat on me and I'm not invulnerable. So
Sure.
I feel a little slighted there. But
I guess I find it interesting because there was this idea that sex wasn't exclusive to your spouse, as long as it was consensual.
Right.
But then as this patriarchy in society was established, women were subjugated. And then their stories started to reflect that. And I just found it interesting. And personally, I find it unfortunate because I prefer the idea that people can just do as they please as long as their spouses are fine with it.
Yeah, well, and that's really how it's always been, and I would argue that today still is.
Yeah.
I think more the story is illustrating the social impact of that, which is to say, if your husband says you can have sex with another man, obviously there's nothing your husband is going to do to you for doing it. Like he's saying, yeah, you can do that. And the same way, if your wife says you can have sex with another woman, then you can do that without any sort of backlash from your wife. But that's not the case for society at large.
Mm-mm.
Even if your wife's like, yeah, you could totally go have sex with a woman.
Society will judge
other people,
you.
if they find out you do that, will be like, ugh. Like there's going to be judgment, there's going to be stigma, there's going to be negative consequences. And I think that's more because typically the gods are going to symbolize society or the rules of society or the spirit of mankind as a collective.
Well, I mean, they had to have their stories reflect their society. I mean, that's true of every mythology.
So I think that story is less like women can't have sex with people outside of their marriage, and more it's your husband is going to take solace in the fact that you are a true and good wife. And if you are not, that will destroy him. It's going to be very upsetting for him. Now, it is unfortunate in that she was tricked, literally tricked by the primal male. Yeah,
kind of like in Le Morte d'Arthur. That's how it felt familiar
but
to me.
That could be read as like the spirit of masculinity seduced her. So it may not have been Vishnu specifically, but just like this very manly man that reminded her of her husband seduced her, which is a much more human response. You'd be like, yeah, I mean, I could see how she would falter there. Mm-hmm. I don't condone it. It's definitely still bad, which is why there is still a punishment, but it's understandable.
Yeah. All right, so I've got one final story here about how a person can become a god. Mm-hmm. So this is the story of Harishchandra from the Bhagavata Purana. Harishchandra was a righteous king, good enough to be a god. To test him, Rishi Vishwamitra put in his path a series of challenges. Vishwamitra tricked the king into giving up control of his kingdom. When rendered destitute, the righteous king left his palace with his wife Taramati and his son Rohita. Just as Harishchandra was about to leave the city, Vishwamitra stopped him and said, "You gave me rights over your city, but what about the ritual gift you are obliged to give a rishi for accepting your offering? A king of your status must give at least 1,000 gold coins. Failure to do so will demonstrate to the world that you do not respect Dharma." Determined to uphold the law of righteous conduct, The penniless Harishchandra sold himself, his wife, and his son on the slave market and gave the sage the gold coins. Harishchandra was thus reduced to the position of a Chandala, keeper of crematoriums, the lowest rank in the Hindu caste hierarchy, which I thought was a little bit strange that the keeper of crematoriums is the lowest rank. But, anyways.
It would seem to be probably the least desirable job.
I guess.
It's your job to keep all the dead bodies and burn them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I don't want to do that.
His wife became a maid and a concubine of a priest. Vishwamitra was still not convinced that Harishchandra was meritorious enough to be a god. So he subjected the former king to another test. He caused Harishchandra's son to die of a snake bite. When Taramati brought the corpse to the crematorium, Harishchandra wept, but he refused to cremate the child until the fee of cremation had been paid. But his wife had no money. Then give me the clothes you wear, otherwise our child will not be cremated. Taramati, though shocked by his adherence to the rules, obeyed. As she began disrobing, all the gods and sages of the cosmos appeared in the crematorium, amazed by the display of absolute adherence to Dharma. They decreed that Harishchandra was fit to be a god.
Yeah, so that's probably the starkest example you'll get of the religion enforcing the social hierarchy, and it's like everything has gone wrong for this guy.
Everything.
But no matter how bad something is, if you follow the rules
of Dharma,
if you follow Dharma, even you could become a god. And so that makes it very easy to convince someone of a lesser rank, like, hey, stop trying to fight against this. That's not Dharma. That's not how you become a god. You just accept where you're at, do what you're supposed to do based on where you're at, and maybe things will go good for you. So, I would say pretty effective.
Yeah.
As even today, the caste system is still pretty.
Yeah, it's still pretty
prevalent.
Prevalent, still pretty strictly enforced, as I understand it.
I don't think at this point it's government
enforced,
but socially. People will just sort of like naturally segregate themselves.
Now, as we've said, it's not just Hinduism. There's also Buddhism and Jainism.
Yeah.
Those are still prevalent in India and surrounding areas. In Nepal, for instance.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's those are our stories for
best I could
Hinduism.
come up with. Hanuman, I think, symbolizes human consciousness.
Yeah.
That's the best I could come up with. I don't know that that's supported by anything other than my own ideas. But he's mischievous. Mm-hmm. He's unpredictable, just like human. Maybe human thought would be a better way to explain it. But I think consciousness works. He can go anywhere in an instant.
Yeah,
just like your thoughts can. He can fly. I mean, he could go literally anywhere. He's strong.
Yeah,
human thoughts are incredibly resilient. Yeah. Once you have a thought, it's very hard to get rid of it.
It's true.
He shapeshifts. He can transform. He can grow in size. He can shrink in size. He's powerful enough to move mountains. These are all ways to conceptualize human consciousness or human thought. But it is best used and most beneficial when subservient to an ideal.
Yeah.
And so Rama is that ideal. He's Vishnu. He's the primal male. He's the main deity. And so when you devote consciousness and thought to the ideal image or the ideal person, then that's when your thoughts are that powerful. That's when they take on these aspects, is they become this force to be reckoned with.
I liked your story. I'm confused why my book didn't have really much mention of him.
I don't know. I mean, outside of that bit of the Ramayana, he's not mentioned again.
Oh, really?
He isn't mentioned at any time before that.
Mm.
It's just when they're like, and then he got the Monkey King's help, and then he had this guy named Hanuman, and Hanuman was a son of the wind god, and super fast, and he went and found Sita, and he came back, and that's it. It's Hanuman's not even the main character; he's a supporting character in this cast of the Ramayana.
Sure.
And so, like all this other stuff, I had to just kind of look up, like, all right, who's Hanuman? Where's this come from? Like the story of the mango was not in the Ramayana, at least in this retelling of the Ramayana that I've read. This is not the actual Ramayana.
Yeah, this is myths of the Hindus
right.
and Buddhists.
It's a prose sort of summary of the Ramayana.
Mm-hmm.
So there might be details in there that maybe these were in the Ramayana. It's just not the version of it that I'd read. But
so yeah, that was our Hindu episode, maybe 2. We went on for a couple hours.
Yeah, it might be 2. We could probably cut out the Graham Hancock stuff.
Could do. So next time we are gonna be covering Les Morts d'Arthur, Book 2 of 21, which is
the Book of Arthur.
Which is Book 2 is the story of Balin.
Yes, the Knight of the Two Swords, or the Knight with Two Swords.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to be covering next time. And then after that, I guess we're going to cover Buddhism.
Yeah, we do Buddhism.
We can do Buddhism.
Let's do that.
Since we said we were going to do that this time and realized that we shouldn't.
That is far too much to try to cover.
Yeah.
I mean, look how long Hinduism took us.
Yeah. So I had fun. I hope you guys had fun. Thank you, Zach, for being here.
Yeah. Thank
you, Moonslate Media, for providing us our equipment. Thank you, Chris, for running our equipment. Thank you, Vidwest. Thank you, Vidwest, for providing some of our equipment. And thank you, Jake Weller, for our intro and our outro.
Awesome music.
It's so cool. Listen to his album, Wasting Time. It's on Spotify, and I think it's in a few other places. See you next time. Bye.